I want to introduce a form that I've created to make outlining a campaign a simple task. At worst, it's a fun mini game for writers to play while they think of adventure ideas to suit their own fancy. In this video, I'm going to show you some examples of how to use the form and then make the form available for a free download. There'll be a link to the PDF hosted on my Google Drive in the video description below. So the first thing is the form itself, and here's a side-by-side of the two sheets. Of course, they're meant to be printed out on one page, front and back. First, you obtain a quest type with a D8 roll, and a major theme with a D20 roll. Then you record a D6 roll, and a D12 roll to obtain a dramatic situation for each of the three story phases. So I've rolled up an example on a sheet of lined paper in groups of 3 adventures with a lone adventure for a total of 10 adventures in the campaign arc. In Ozric, monsters are assigned a level from 1 to 10. In general, a quest boss with good help should be about 2 levels higher than the average party level, while a solo boss may be 4 levels higher than the party average. It is possible for players to get in over their characters' heads. However, lower level characters probably aren't going to be encountering the high level villains directly. For my example, I rolled the quest up in groups of 3 with 1 lone quest rolled at the end, giving me a 10 quest campaign arc. I planned a standard campaign arc to take 100 weeks at 10 hours per week playing to get a player to roughly levels 10 to 12, depending on class. If your group plays only about half that time per week, then plan to take about twice as long to finish the campaign arc. For a reference as to how I came up with that particular segment of time to be the length of a campaign, it's actually from a quote by Gygax that was in the Strategic Review number 7 in an article entitled D&D is only as good as the DM. This quote comes from page 23. It is reasonable to calculate that if a fair player takes part in 50 to 75 games in the course of a year, he should acquire sufficient experience points to make him about 9th to 11th level, assuming that he manages to survive all that play. The acquisition of successively higher levels will be proportionate to enhanced power and the number of experience points necessary to attain them. So another year of play will by no means mean a doubling of levels, but rather the addition of perhaps 2 or 3 levels. Using this gauge, it should take 4 or 5 years to see level 20. And as far as I understand it, that is roughly the power curve that Gary followed in his own campaign, and also what he thought of Arneson's campaign up in Minnesota. The source of the story, Waypoint Ideas, is from a mix of Ronald Tobias's 20 Master Plots and George Polti's The 36 Dramatic Situations. I've included some bullet points for the major headings of Tobias's work, but Polti's book was published in 1895, and the earliest English translations from 1916 and 1917 are now in the public domain. So Polti's book is itself just his definition of the categories he proposed, along with an elucidation of subtypes, lists of necessary characters, etc. So I'll simply provide a link to it on Google Books in the video description below. Polti's book is meant to be a ready reference. It discusses necessary characters or agencies and variant subtypes for the 36 dramatic situations he posited. With that said, these plots may not directly involve the players. However, there's still a cast of characters moving their own interests forward. Essentially, you're writing stories for everyone except the player characters themselves. That can include writing short legends, tall tales, and other folklore from recent or distant history of the world. So, this is not about balancing an adventure to the level of the characters controlled by players or planning on participating in a particular game. This is more along the lines of setting up multiple tiers of stories in motion at the beginning of play. After that, the players can be allowed to work their own way through the levels. With that said, the levels themselves should be balanced out over a fairly large region. The world can only take so many level 10 monsters per area of the world, whether that's square mile, square kilometer, etc. You can use more than one level 10 monster per campaign, starting around party level 8 or so. For example, as a one-off in a deep dungeon against a player group with an average level of 6, or with 2 competent level 9 henchmen in the level 10 adventure. The conventional TSR breakdown would be for levels 1 to 3 at low, levels 4 to 7 for intermediate, and levels 8 to 10 for high-level adventures. The odd episode could occur as the Turning Point 7th episode, or a double-length grand finale level 10 adventure, just as examples. I wrote out the quest type and general theme along with each of the dramatic situations for each of the 3 phases for each of the 10 adventures. As I went through the 3 phases for each adventure's through line, I thought of a rivalry between a neighboring mid-level nobility triggering a real goblin and then giant war. The 7th quest indicates a secret involvement of a family member in the plans of evil, so I'm going to use that as a denouement turning point. The rest of the form has to do with what I'm calling here the PACE system. Once you have the 3 phases in which the party of player characters will face introductions and rising tensions, or a climax of action, or declining tensions and conclusions, you then have to work out the conflict or conflicts of the environment and how many environments will be involved for the total campaign. Finally, you relate all the main characters, player and non-player alike, to an alignment wheel, and depending on how that list is balanced, players will meet particular attitudes along the way. Conflicts could vary between different arc levels. One major conflict could run through all the adventures. I use environment to mean a 6-mile hex at the scale of the world map, but broken down into 20 to 40 smaller hexes as locations within that hex. And here's an example of adapting the campaign to a hex grid location. So even if you roll having only 1 environment for a whole campaign, you still have more than 10 options for a quest location hexes than just hexes on a map. The map being shown in this example is actually going to another campaign already, but it was designed with this kind of thinking in mind. This is more or less the system I've used since the mid-1980s. So you see the little town here, and then there's a drawing of the town. However, you can start with a blank hex map and add all your own points of interest. Though I'm not going to read through all the specific story arcs that I generated, but the die rolls got me started thinking about ideas. I could use the rolled results as adventures, or just use them as background filler if they don't seem appealing to the player group. Based on the rolls I made and the first ideas I had for a campaign adventure, I began filling out then the top of the form. The next step for me is usually to write a short microfiction outline of the story idea. These ideas can be kept loose since they will be introduced flexibly at times when player characters cross paths or with those involved, or even just function as stories within the story as a means of adding depth. What I'll do with the alignment wheel is keep plotting on different parts of the cast that will be part of the alignment balance of the campaign overall. And however that ends up will be kind of how I determine what the overall pool or direction of the quest is as far as alignment. And then for environments, we want to roll separately for a number of environments to be, so the number of hexes, remember, each with different numbers of environments that can be used. And then a kind of dominant terrain type that you might find, including towns and cities. And the random rules. So then we also have the type of conflict, which is standard fiction conflicts. You just happen to roll for it. The one quirk I have here is if you roll 8 twice, then the second 8 indicates kaiju has attacked. So, whether it's Godzilla or in my particular case, I use the Tarask as a kaiju. That would be the destruction of the world. So that would be the very, very end of such a campaign. But as part of the run up to that, other massive gargantuan-type animals are also emerging from the Underdark and attacking the city. So it would not be unusual for a large monster to arise from the depths and attack the countryside. Lastly, I just want to point out a few things that this all pairs up to. Once you have your dungeon, once you have your campaign arc set in place, you can actually start to work with random dungeons or random wilderness terrain or random monsters themselves. And in fact, if you're working with first edition Dungeons and Dragons, the Monster Manual 2 and the Fiend Folio have nicely numbered monster levels. However, the original Monster Manual did not necessarily include that. So if you look on page 174, you'll actually see a list of monster levels, and that can be used with the spreadsheet on the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And what you want to do is look at the XP values and then go back and consult this table to figure out what level monster you're looking at. And then just a last thing, if we look on page 100, we also see that there's a system for using random rolls for developing non-player characters as well. Don't be afraid to use that to add some zest to your non-player characters that your party will meet as they go along. Okay, that's where I want to go ahead and wrap this video up. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them in the comment section below. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'll leave a link to the PDF so that you can download the form and use it as your own leisure. I'll also put a link to Polti's 36 Dramatic Situations. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video.